Now taking a look at some news from East Africa now, we have Tsavo Securities has just released its second quarter market overview as well as projections for the third quarter of this year. To get some insights into these numbers, we are joined in Kenya by Wolfgang Omondi. He's the Director of Fixed Income from Tsavo Securities. A very good afternoon to you, Wolfgang. Now let's start off with the NSE. We have seen the NSE on an upward trajectory. In the second quarter, it was up 4.29%, but turnover, however, on the market was down about 12%. Talk us through the dynamics of the second quarter trading on the NSE.
I think one of the main factors, or one of the main contributors to the upturn in the stock market is the increased interest that we are seeing from offshore. The other side, I think, is we are beginning to see yields drop over the yield curve, and probably because of that, we are able to see a bit of growth in the NSE index. In addition to that, I think that we are seeing a bit more confidence into the market as inflation is slowly getting under control, and the interest rate regime that we saw earlier, in the first quarter of this year and the last quarter of last year has somehow eased off.
Now looking at some of the sectors, we did perform quite well. We had manufacturing and allied up about 20.29%. We also had telecoms. We know that Safaricom plays a big role in that on that front, up about 16.3%. Is this the type of growth that we could see coming through from these two sectors into the third quarter as well as the fourth quarter maybe?
Well, absolutely, because as you see, with inflation coming down, if you recall, inflation peaked at about just under 20% in November, and between then and now, the figures released in June, we've seen it drop to almost 10%. And of course, you realize that when inflation is high, you get a lot of people who have growth plans for their respective businesses holding off with the hope that when inflation eases, they can come back in. And maybe with that, then you definitely see a bit more activity in the manufacturing sector as people try and grow their businesses.
That's quite interesting. You see inflation currently at levels about 8% towards the end of the year. Your thoughts on the inflation environment? We do have commodity prices coming down quite significantly on that front.
Absolutely. Yes, we've seen fuel drop, and in fact, at the beginning of this month, there was a fairly significant drop in the price of fuel. Fuel contributes about 18% to the consumer price index. Of course, at the top of that is food at about 36%. So definitely, if you see a significant drop in the price of fuel, it will definitely feed quite heavily into inflation. And based on that background, we think that if this trend does continue, then of course you will see inflation within single digits, definitely by the end of this year.
Inflation in single digits, looking at the central bank dropping interest rates by 150 basis points. Could we perhaps see more interest rate decreases going forward, and to what magnitude?
Well, giving you a magnitude would probably be selling my business away, because that's what I'm paid to do. But what I can say is, having seen the shilling, holding steady despite the 150 basis point drop on the monetary policy rate, I think we are fairly safe in that view, because initially one of the worries was that at any point in time, if they did something about the rate and the shilling weakened, then of course, you get imported inflation, if you will. But since it has held steady, and it looks like it's holding steady, and we are seeing food prices drop and oil commodity prices drop, then definitely we do expect further cuts with the central bank. This time around they're meeting bi-monthly, and not bi-monthly, once every 2 months. And we do see, in our view, that there are going to be further drops going forward, maybe to about 15% by the end of the year.
Let's move to the fixed income market. We have seen the yields on some of the government treasuries are falling off quite a bit. There is talk of most investors moving from the fixed income market into the equities market. Looking at the fixed income market and its current state, what are your scenarios for the third quarter?
Yes, fixed income, the yield curve is still a bit off. It's not normalized yet, because on the shorter end we are seeing a slight uptick. In the last auction, the Treasury bill rates did move up, and I understand the cutoff was significantly higher. But that's really because the central bank has been mopping up liquidity from the market at fairly high rates, and this has made it not very attractive for commercial banks to invest in. But as rates come down, because over the last 3-4 weeks we've seen about 300-400 points drop in the repo rate, and I think going forward we are definitely going to see banks participating more as they try to pick up yield. So on that end we do see it correcting. On the longer end, there is a bit of upward pressure, but I think the central bank have been clear and are also determined to keep rates fairly stable, because as we know, high rates do not augur well for GDP. And I do know that in discussions with them, they have hinted that they're looking beyond our borders. They're looking to fund their budgetary requirements beyond our borders, and hopefully that will at least enable the market to keep a fairly stable interest rate regime.
Wolfgang, let's touch on some of the investment risks. One risk that comes to mind is the political uncertainty. We are due to have elections next year. What kind of scenario could we see coming through when the elections, or perhaps for the rest of the year, given that we've got this political uncertainty still sitting in the market?
Yeah, if you ask me, that was probably the biggest worry. I mean, yes, we talk about inflation, we talk about commodity prices and things like that, but yes, political risk. I mean, so far so good, and like I mentioned earlier, what we are seeing in the stock market is fairly some significant interest from offshore players. Now, I can only just hope that we do not witness what we saw in the beginning of 2008, and just hope for a fairly, for a stable and encouraging political or elections, if you will. Now, I guess it is anybody's guess how it will go, but I mean, my personal view is that we are going to see a good election process, and hopefully with that, probably a lot more confidence come the second quarter of 2013.